Hi everyone, I'm Nicole Goehring with the Nevada Division of Water Resources. Today I'll be talking about water conservation plans and the requirements that are listed in Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 540. After I go through the requirements, I'm going to talk about some of the common weaknesses that we've seen and some tips and resources for the planning process. First, let's go over who is required to submit a water conservation plan. These plans are required of water suppliers, defined as public or private entities that supply water for either municipal, industrial, or domestic purposes. For suppliers that are regulated under the Public Utilities Commission, there are similar requirements, but those plans do not come through our office for review and approval. Plans need to meet the requirements listed in NRS 540. They need to cover their service area and reflect the climate and living conditions of that service area. Every 5 years, plans need to be updated and they are reapproved by our office as long as they meet all of the requirements. Approved plans get posted on the NDWR website and they are available at a water supplier's office as well. These plans are important because they promote efficient, conscientious, and non-wasteful use of our limited resource. In order to find an approved plan, go to water.nv.gov. Then click on Programs at the top of the screen and select the Water Planning tab. There you'll see Water Conservation Plans. When you click on that link, it'll take you to a page that shows each county's water conservation plan. An easier way to get to them would be to use the search bar here and start typing in water conservation plans and select it from the drop-down. The initial water conservation plan requirements were formed during the 1991 legislative session. Almost 15 years later, in 2005, the requirements were revisited and a new requirement was added to update plans every 5 years. In 2007, requirements were added to better show the impacts of conservation measures. Changes in 2017 included requirements for discussing a couple of specific conservation measures and moving toward more quantitative analysis. In 2019, the shift towards using quantitative data continued. Now goals are required for acceptable levels of water loss, and audits or calculations are required of certain water suppliers. On this slide, I've listed out a summary of each required element for the plan. The orange text shows the newest requirements. For any supplier working on updating their plan, they can go to the website and open the checklist that we have posted in order to make sure that they've covered all of their bases. I want to emphasize that plans do not need to go in the order listed here. Suppliers have a lot of flexibility in how they want to structure their plan. The first requirement is to describe methods of public education. The messaging needs to address that water is a limited supply and why conservation is important, as well as encouraging low water landscaping. We encourage suppliers to create material that's specific to their service area. For example, here are a couple images from Tumwa's newsletter, as well as a Carson City logo and slogan. Public education can take many different forms, and we encourage you to do what works for you and be creative. This might be through attendance at public events or other in-person presentations, through publications, or perhaps through signage. The next requirement is for conservation measures that meet the needs of the service area. It's important for suppliers to really consider what measures they can really engage in and commit to. Plans don't need to include a lot of conservation measures as long as the supplier is committed to them and they're effective. I've listed out here some different ideas for what these measures can cover. Suppliers can also go to the website and look at approved plans for more ideas on what others are doing. Plans are required to include a goal for acceptable levels of water loss. Along with that, there needs to be a plan on how that goal will be achieved. If a system is fully metered, then the supplier has access to some great data to really inform the formulation of that goal and come up with a goal that is based on a specific volume or percentage. EPA has some guidance that will help meet this requirement, and I've included the link here below the figure. Going through this step of writing the plan is a great opportunity to really learn more about the system in detail. Plans should address any and all efforts to reuse effluent. The effluent might be used for dust control purposes, to irrigate landscaping, or for irrigation of parks and golf courses like the one shown here. Creating a contingency plan for drought conditions is a really important component of the plan and should be taken seriously by the supplier. How is a supplier going to continue providing potable water to its customers as demand may be going up and the reliability of the supply may be going down? Suppliers should consider setting triggers that set into course actions that will ensure a reliable supply. This may include the Drought Monitor. I've got a snip of that here on the slide. Monitoring supply water levels, monitoring climate and weather conditions, looking at the changing needs of the system and specific customer dynamics in the service area. Thinking about a worst case scenario now is a lot better than doing it when it's happening. The plan needs to have a schedule that includes the actions described in the plan. This could take the form of a simple table, for example. Having just a statement that says that all elements of the plan are in effect isn't very helpful for anyone, but something that shows the update intervals and how often leakage inspections are done, and all of the things that are routine, that can all be put into a good schedule, and that may be helpful as there's turnover within the supplier, gives a good idea of what needs to be done for conservation purposes. In Nevada, not all communities are fully metered, but the NRS clearly states that that's the direction that we should be moving. In the plan, if a system is fully metered, it needs to say so. If it's not, the supplier should consider including what steps can be taken to get there, what steps they are taking to get fully metered, what some of the barriers are and how they can overcome them. Full metering is really important to having good data for addressing water loss and water waste. Plans need to include water efficiency standards for new development. This requirement can be met by looking at the city or county codes and including those efficiency requirements listed there. Also, in the 2019 session, Assembly Bill 163 amended Nevada Revised Statute 278, and those efficiency standards could also be cited in this section. Suppliers need to address their tiered rate structure in the plan. This applies to most of the traditional suppliers that have a customer base spread across a service area, but for something like an industrial manufacturing plant, they don't have customers that they're delivering to, so this would not apply in that case. When describing watering restrictions, the plan needs to include the times and days of the week when they apply. This is one of those requirements that would easily fit under a conservation measures section if that's how your plan is organized. The next two requirements apply to suppliers who have more than 500 connections. First, they need to have measures that show the effectiveness of their plan. Suppliers can think of this as an opportunity to show off how much their conservation measures are making a difference. The second part is that they need to estimate how much water is conserved based on the plan terms. So these two can be very similar and overlapping in the plan. EPA has numbers to reference for amounts conserved based on different conservation measures, and I recommend you take a look at the document that's linked here. But applying that data to your community being served, that will be more useful to you and your customers than simply copying and pasting EPA's generic values. We're almost to the end of the list here, but this element is a big, important new one. It's about water loss calculations, and it applies to suppliers that are not transient. Suppliers who serve over 3,300 people need to complete an audit using the methodology and software from American Water Works Association. For other suppliers, they can do a simpler calculation without the software using the data that they have from billing for meters and submit that. As subsequent updates to the plans are submitted, suppliers will need to do comparisons to previous calculations, and that'll help them analyze progress toward the goal-setting step that we talked about earlier, where suppliers need to set goals for acceptable levels of water loss. The final piece to include with the plan is a description of incentives. The NRS describes this as an informational piece of the plan. I would encourage suppliers to consider how they can motivate customers to conserve, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a monetary incentive. I've listed out some different ideas here. It could be a partnership with local businesses. It could be something very locally based that would be appealing to the customers in the service area. Incentives should specifically address encouraging water conservation, retrofitting structures with more efficient plumbing fixtures, and installing landscaping that uses less water. Since we've started reviewing the water conservation plans, we've noticed some common weaknesses. Despite these weaknesses, some plans can still get approved if they still meet the minimum requirements described in the NRS. If they don't meet the requirements, we'll reach out to the supplier and let them know exactly what needs to be updated. One of the things that we see quite a bit of is what we've been calling the menu of options, where a plan lists some voluntary or could do conservation actions, but they don't commit to anything, and it's unclear in some of these plans what actions the water supplier is taking for the sake of conservation. We'd like to see plans that show what the supplier is committed to. It's important for the supplier to be realistic and to go through the planning process and evaluate a menu of options and select from there what they want to put down on paper and use that as they move forward. Another thing we see quite a bit is a schedule that isn't really a schedule, and I described this earlier. So just including a little section that lists out the practices that are being taken and their frequency or when they are going to be implemented, that would be beneficial to the strength of the plan. In the drought contingency plans, we commonly see references to the Drought Monitor and what restrictions will go into place at different drought severities, but there's often not a robust discussion about how water will be supplied to customers when there is a shortage or when one is anticipated. And again, I'll emphasize that planning for that now is a lot better than figuring out and scrambling how to deal with it when it's happening in real time. One other thing that I would encourage suppliers to put in their plans are any enforcement strategies. For example, if there's a residential property that is wasting large amounts of water, what are the standard steps that the supplier can take to control that situation? And the final point I want to make here is that if there's a requirement that does not apply in a supplier's service area, the plan should say so with a brief explanation of why. If there's no explanation, then while we're reviewing the plans, we'll reach out to the supplier contact and ask them to make that change. We can't approve it if it's not addressed in any way. There are a number of resources and approaches that can be taken to make strong water conservation plans. Throughout the presentation, I made some references to EPA documents, and some of those are a bit dated, but still have relevant information to pull into a supplier's water conservation plan. I would also suggest involving the folks who have boots on the ground, who are out and see what's happening in the service area and getting their input while updating a plan, as well as talking to the customers, the public, about what their thoughts are on water conservation. On the DWR website, we also have a guide posted, and we are working on updating that to get it up to speed with the new requirements and also make it more comprehensive and useful for suppliers. To get additional assistance with the entire writing and update process for a plan, there are two nonprofits that have been helping with this. One is Nevada Rural Water Association, that's a well-known group around here based in Carson City, and then also the Rural Community Assistance Corporation, they go by RCAC. You can also ask us if you have any specific questions before submitting your plan. Feel free to shoot us an email. That's the easiest way to get a hold of us right now. For financial assistance on these plans, we're still learning about how these options work, but NDEP manages grant and loan funds, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, their Water Smart program, also has funding. I know for sure for drought planning, they have some funding available right now. In conclusion, I want to encourage suppliers to take this strategic planning opportunity seriously to create a meaningful and realistic and useful water conservation plan rather than just an exercise in checking off the boxes. This is a good opportunity to gain new insights about the supplier system, look at data in new ways, and interact with staff and the public to possibly generate some new ideas. There's no set report template that needs to be followed. Suppliers should do what makes sense for them, and that includes creating joint plans where it makes sense geographically. So that is all I have for this presentation, and I'm happy to take questions.